Right. All right. Why don't I go ahead and get started? I don't want to penalize all those of you who are able to be with us on time and you're raring to go. My name is Janera Gaston, and I'm the first Vice President for Programs for the Manhattan chapter of the Coalition of 100 Black Women. And it's such a pleasure to have you all on with us. I wanted to welcome you on behalf of the chapter. And for those of you who are not familiar with who we are and what we do, NCBW 100 is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to advocating on behalf of Black women and girls, particularly in the areas of health, economic empowerment, and education. Our mission is to provide leadership development and gender equity through programs, advocacy, and partnerships that create meaningful opportunities and address critical issues facing our communities, like the one we'll be tackling today. And clearly, the work that we do is so much more relevant than ever in these days and months to come. So our chapter in Manhattan is part of a larger national network of sister coalitions around the country that actively work to uplift and empower Black women in the communities they serve. Through their programs, through all of our programs, we aim to inspire change, champion diversity, and create a lasting impact. For us, it's in New York, but certainly beyond and even globally. We're thrilled to have you all with us today as we continue the conversation around important topics like this, which matter clearly to not just the physical health, but the social, the economic health and well-being of our community. So thank you for joining us all. And at this time, before we do get into it, just in terms of housekeeping, this webinar will be recorded. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and you can watch it again if you like, or please feel free to send the link on to friends in the community. If you could just keep your selves muted for the duration of the webinar so that we can definitely have a good webinar without a whole lot of background noise. But if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat and we'll take those during or after our presenters are finished. And please do feel free to ask questions. Throw up a thumbs up, a happy, a heart, we'll take it all. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sonia Banks. Dr. Banks is the chair of our Public Policy Committee, and she is the immediate past president of the chapter. Dr. Banks.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. We know there's so much going on in our world, and you all are definitely people that care about it. So folks will be joining us, and we are passionate about the Coalition of 100 Black Women. We serve and support Black women and girls through economic development and security, health, liberation, and education. We make sure that women and girls are understanding their power in terms of breaking through the glass ceiling and having the tools that they need to survive and support. And we work through various committees to keep this work alive. We educate, to advocate, to legislate. And tonight, right now, in the next 45 minutes or so, we felt compelled to do a talk on what it's going to take to keep America surviving. We're in very challenging times. You know the statement from Confucius, may you live in interesting times. We are living in amazingly interesting times. So today we're dedicated to having a real conversation about what's at stake right now in our country. And we believe that the democracy that we have inherited because we were imported or migrated is important to our skin and to our value as a citizen. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speakers today. We have with us our Deputy Borough President from Brooklyn, New York. She hails with an amazing history and background. Many of you all know her. She is Reverend Kim Council. She has spent our undergraduate years where our focus and study was political science. She spent over close to 30 years in a legal firm, studying and understanding how the legal process works. She also, as you know, is a faith-based believer and has worked in our community churches in Brooklyn. And now, because of her commitment to community, her support and focus, unwavering dedication to the issues that matter to those of us that live in Brooklyn, she is now our deputy borough president. And she has a plethora of knowledge and understanding around many issues, including the voting process and how democracy works. So please pay attention and notice the wonderful attention and education you'll be getting from our deputy borough president. Additionally, our other speaker is no less than Denise Johnson-White. She comes to us with a understanding as a Supreme Court justice. She came to us in many, many roles before. Many of you may have come to talks we had with either Kim or with Denise. She has a Juris Doctorate in 1997 from St. John's, worked in as a corporate counselor, moved in as a principal law secretary to work with Honorable Janice Taylor, Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of New York. She also served in the served as a judge of the Civil Court of the City of New York of Queens County. From 2021 to 2022, she presided in Queens County Criminal Court. She was elected as a justice of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, and she currently presides in the Supreme Court of the State of New York, Queens County Civil Team. So welcome to our Deputy Borough President, and welcome to the Honorable Denise Johnson. We are going to use a PowerPoint just to keep us on track, and hopefully if you have questions, put them in the chat. Public policy is on the call, and we will be checking the chat. So very clearly and in our succinctness, we want to talk about how your vote makes New York State and New York City democracy work. This talk was put together not for you alone, if you get it, but for you to share with everybody. So take out your pen, take notes, be ready to make sure that anyone you come into contact with who is either first or second generation in this country understands that democracy only works when you work it. And that means you've got to vote, no matter what you think. Next slide. I'll be turning it over to our speakers. And so basically, I just want to open with this: who can vote? And I said certain citizens, but it's all citizens except a few. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim and Denise now. And Kim, if you can walk us through these slides, and you and Denise, they're just phenomenal. We did a pre-talk, and I just was spellbound at how they understand this content. So could I turn it over to you now, Kim Council? Reverend Kim. Oh, you're muted.
Muted.
I just realized that as I was talking. Thank you so much, Dr. Banks and Ms. Gaston, for convening this group. And I'm honored to serve on this panel with the Honorable Denise Johnson. So who can vote? If you're a citizen of the United States, and you are not incarcerated, you are eligible to vote. And I think Judge Johnson could talk a little bit more about those who are in and out of the carceral system and how this impacts them. But as long as you are a citizen of the United States, once you are 18 years old, you have the ability to register to vote. In New York State, I believe you can begin the process of registration if you are 17 years old. And turning 18 in the year of the election, you will be eligible to register to vote. But anyone who is a citizen of the United States and is not incarcerated has the right to vote.
Thank you. Denise, do you want to weigh in on that one, our Honorable Judge Johnson?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And I join Reverend Counsel in saying it's truly my honor to be here with you this evening. This is one of my favorite topics. I get so excited about it, so I'm happy to be here. I just want to, one thing, you now in New York State can register at 16, and your registration will just be held until you're 18. You'll be automatically ready to vote. Another category of people, very small, are people who have been deemed mentally incompetent by a court. So these are people who generally, like I said, they've been deemed incompetent. You have a guardian, you can't vote. And people who are incarcerated and convicted and serving on a felony cannot vote. So there are a lot of people who are sitting in Rikers Island awaiting trial, they can vote. People who are in jail for whatever reason on a misdemeanor, they can vote. And it is an automatic right. There was a time where you had to request from the court to get your right to vote back, but now it is automatic. They are eligible to register and they can vote. Oh, and actually another recent change was if you were on felony parole, you could not vote, but now you can.
Right. That's the kind of details we want. Thank you. And if you are homeless, you can vote. You put down on the application that you're at the bench on 86th Street and that your mailing address may be a shelter. So those are two different, number 8 and number 9. But the homeless person who thinks they don't have the right or entitlement, they can register to vote and vote.
There's also I forgot to add that if you are a victim of domestic violence, or you know someone who's a victim of domestic violence, because your voting registration information is publicly available, if you are or you know someone who is a victim of domestic violence, they can put in a request to have their information withheld so that they will be registered to vote, but you won't know where it is that they reside.
Wow.
And just piggybacking on that we discussed earlier in our little group that today is National Domestic Violence Awareness Day. So when I was at work today, some more information came up about this, that there are people, I was about to say women, but anyone who is a victim of domestic violence, because we understand that people are registered to vote and your polling place is generally pretty close to your home, your permanent address. There are people who are displaced from their home because they are a victim of domestic violence, who also don't feel comfortable going back to that neighborhood where their victimizer could be also at the same polling place. So they had a big announcement today throughout the court system and things all over saying that if you are in that situation, or in fact anyone, can also go to your local board of elections and vote there. Even though everyone has a polling place, if you go to the board of elections, you can cast a vote, which is generally not in your neighborhood.
That is so important because fear is keeping people from the polls. Apathy is keeping people from the polls, ignorance. But now there's no law that's saying you can't go and there's no condition being subverted so that you can't have access. So thank you for that. Next slide. And this is just a picture of registering to vote. Anything else that we need people to know about the process as we go in now? Some folk are not understanding. Is it true or isn't it true that you can actually vote the day before election day? Can you go into the election office and do that, Board of Elections, and do that?
Early voting in New York State starts on October the 26th. So on October the 26th, all throughout the state and all throughout the city, there will be spaces where you can go to vote early. But it is based on where you live. So you would have to either go to nycvotes.org or go to the BOE's, the Board of Elections website, to find out where your early voting site is. But early voting starts October the 26th and it goes all the way up until I think
November 3rd.
There you go.
Good. And if you're not registered, can you register the day before?
I think the last day to register is October 26th.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So you cannot walk into the Board of Elections on the day before and register. So I was told that was possible. So this is why we have these meetings, because this isn't the time. I do know, for those of you that are getting that blue voters guide, how many of you have gotten that blue voters guide at home already? Check your mail. If you have it, make sure you see that polling site, because literally the chair of Community Board 12 opened hers up and she had been told she has to go vote somewhere else. And she thought it was a done deal. So please check that. Of course, you know, you can go online, but please don't leave that to the last minute. You don't want to be at your old site, have to get back on transportation and go somewhere else. So read all of the things you have to vote for, but make sure you have that site. Next slide.
Another thing is that your early
Yes.
voting site could be very different than your election day voting site. So make sure you're
Correct.
aware which is which. And I just wanted to
Yes.
stress again, October 26th is a very important day. It is the last day to register to vote. It is the last day to update your address with the Board of Elections. It's the last day to ask online or by mail for an absentee ballot. And it's the first day of early voting.
There you go. A lot happening on that date. Make sure that you share that with friends. The other thing I want to add is they will change your early voting poll site. Right? Someone got theirs changed. They thought they were one place and now they're another. So do check and make sure so you know where to go. Thanks so much. Next slide. Okay, so I think we've gone over this, but Denise, you want to move us through?
Checking on your polling site.
I think we've got that, right?
Another thing to check is the hours of early voting. We're pushing everyone to try to do early voting because we are hoping for a very massive turnout, and we don't want people to wait until November 5th, and then you never know what could happen. You never know, you're running late that day, you have to work late that day, something happens with your children or your family. So anyone who could, it would be wonderful because it gives you more time, but their hours vary from day to day. So it's also very important to go before, they say no before you go. Know exactly where you're going, what time you need to be there, what exactly you're voting for, and be informed all around before you show up.
Good. Thank you so much. Next slide. All right, so now we're gonna get into it. You may need to scroll this. Oh, this little screen
I'm
isn't
sorry,
showing up.
Sonia, I don't know if we were if there's another slide about, I know we were just talking about early voting and election day
Yes.
voting. Is there another slide later on about absentee voting?
No, let's talk about absentee voting.
Voting by that's another way to vote is by mail. And as I said, October 26th is the last day to request an application to vote by mail. During the COVID pandemic, they had stopped temporarily asking why you needed it, but it's back now. You have to say, I'm unavailable on election day, or I'll be out of the state, or I'm unavailable by disability or illness or age. If you check one of those, you will continually be sent an absentee ballot until you tell them that you don't want one. The reason this is important is because they have adjusted the law again, such that if you request an absentee ballot and you receive an absentee ballot, you cannot go in and cast your vote on a voting machine because they've already sent you an absentee ballot.
Oh, that's
So
important.
previously, for the last couple of years, if you changed your mind and just said, no, I want to go and scan my ballot, I could do that. But now if you've been sent one, you are to vote that way by mail. You can drop it off in any polling place. You could drop it off with the Board of Elections. You could put it in the mail. If you do it by mail, make sure it's postmarked on time. But if you do, for whatever reason, you just go rogue and say, I'm changing my mind, I'm showing up at a polling place, you will be voting by affidavit ballot and not by regular ballot. And that's not what we want.
That's very important to know. Thank you so much for that. And that people do forget, they think they can change their mind and they've already given that vote away. Thank you. So how does my vote keep democracy alive? This is really what we're trying to make sure that anyone that doesn't understand that their vote can actually shift, you can look at various elections where people won by 50 votes, 100 votes, scary, important elections that were won by a nose because someone decided not to go, it was raining, or they didn't take their neighbors with them. So let's kind of dig into this. How does my vote keep democracy alive? Can you take us through this?
Sure. I think
About the voting process?
yeah, the conversation that we were having around this particular slide was the difference between federal elections and electoral college and local elections. And I think, one thing that we did not talk about for New York City, they instituted, I think, during the pandemic, ranked choice voting. And a lot of people don't understand how that ranked choice voting works. And we've had many instances. Now, if you're running for, I think, judge or district attorney, there is no ranked choice voting. It's you win the majority of the votes, you've won the election. But the way ranked choice voting works in the city, for city council, for borough president, you can rank your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. If there's somebody who you really like, and if nobody in that race gets a majority, over 50% of the vote, then they began to eliminate people at the bottom of the list. And then those people whose votes have been eliminated, if whoever their second choice is, then those votes begin to get counted. And they keep rinsing and repeating this process, eliminating the people who are at the bottom until someone gets over 50% of the votes. And so that's why it's so very important, number one, for us to educate ourselves on who the people are that are running for office. In this day and age, to not know who's running for what and what these people stand for, it's I think, we have every single tool in our tool belt in order to find that information. New York City Votes is a wonderful tool. Most people who are running for office will go into their studio and they'll put a video together, and they will have a video explaining why they're voting. It's only about 2 or 3 minutes, I think, that you have, but you'll be able to see all of the candidates who are running for office. They put out these wonderful little pamphlets that I just got mine in the mail. Your voter guide. Can't see it because I got
That's right.
Your voter guide, that gives you all kind of information about who's on the ballot, and then their ballot proposals that are on the ballot. Like in this election, there are going to be 6 ballot proposals that are on the back of our ballot. And I was sharing while we were having this conversation earlier this week that when I ran for city council, probably in 2012, there was an individual who won by like 160 votes. And so, when you think about these local elections, and how important it is that we participate in the primary. And there's a huge difference between the primaries and the general election. So in New York City, primaries are in June. And if I'm running for office, for example, if I'm running for city council, you have about, let's say, 160,000 people who are in a city council district. Of those 160,000 people, perhaps 130 are registered Democrats. Out of those 130,000 registered Democrats in that city council district, maybe 8,000 of those people will vote in the primaries. And here's the thing to understand about New York City politics. As much as we love third-party candidates and we would love to have multiple choices, the reality is that in New York City, you're either gonna be voting for a Democrat or Republican. There are people who may run on Working Families Party line. There are some people who may run on Green Party lines and independent lines. But the reality is that in New York City, if you're independent, if you're registered as an independent, you will not be allowed to vote in the primary for the Democratic candidates. And here's the thing, because New York is overwhelmingly Democratic, those people who vote in the primary are choosing who is going to represent you. Because in a general election, whoever the Democratic nominee is, it is incredibly rare, particularly in New York City, for someone who is not a Democrat to win a primary election. So if you run in a primary and you decided, I'm not going to vote in the primary, I'm going to wait until December, or I'm going to register until November when the general election is, or I'm an independent and I don't necessarily agree with the Democrats, I don't necessarily agree with the Republicans, or I want to, I'm a part of the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, and that is your right. But you then need to understand that the way this process is set up is that the person who is the Democratic nominee for New York City most likely is going to win the election. So if you want to have a say in who it is that is making the decisions about your sanitation, about potholes in your street, about the speed limit that just got reduced from 25 to 20, if you want to have a say in how your tax dollars are being spent, because city council members, borough presidents, mayors, they have incredible millions of dollars of discretionary money that they are spending, making decisions about your tax dollars. You're talking about New York City, who has a budget, an annual budget of $100 billion, which is larger than 48 states in the United States.
Wow,
How is that
wow.
money going to be spent? And so you want to make sure that you're educated about who is running, that you are registered in one of the major political parties so that you can make a decision about who is going to represent you, and that you look at when the primary is, and that you figure out how to vote in that primary. And don't wait to the general election, because by the time the general election rolls around, in local elections in particular, the decision has already been made for you.
That's it. That's it. Let's go to the next slide. That's exactly what we're together for, to have this kind of conversation. I don't often think about trying to make sure that everyone's going to make sure they're at their primary. I don't think about that all the time. And this is why we need to, because we're undercutting ourselves. This is the slide, and I don't know if you want to take us through this, Kim or Denise, but just so you get a sense of how our democracy looks. Do you want to walk us through that, Denise?
Yeah,
All right.
the way that my eyes are set up, this thing is really small. So
Yeah, it's tiny.
I am at the point of take your glasses off. You can see better. Okay.
But
All
just an
right.
overview.
This is so interesting because I have a daughter who's in the 6th grade, and this is exactly what we're doing, the checks and balances and branches of government. As we know, federal and state and local all have a legislative, executive, judiciary. I'm sorry, I cannot read anything on them.
That's a, well,
Okay,
maybe
so the
talk it.
legislative branch, obviously in this election, well, in any election at the federal, we'd be voting for members of Congress, in the state, the assembly, or the state senate and the city council. And the executive branch, the governor, the attorney generals, the president, all those people, and the comptrollers, also both city and state, and the judiciary. And on this ballot, we have people who will be running for city judges, a county position, and state judges.
Yes.
Federal judges are appointed by Congress, so that's never an issue.
That is important, that it's not just a presidential election.
Right,
in
right.
New York City. And this is why we're having this conversation,
And
because you don't want to go in and go like this and say, oh, I think that's Hidalgo. I think you want to be informed, because the nature of the way the city and the state run, you want to know what they're thinking and what they're about.
And I think it's important. I think it's also important to share that the legislature creates laws. The executive branch enacts laws. The judiciary branch interprets laws. And so you have to think in terms of who do I talk to for what? You know, like if I want a policy, and if I want a law passed, then I'm going to talk to the assembly person or the senate person, the senator. And at the city level, I'm going to talk to the city council member. If I want something enacted, then that's going to be on the governor, or that's going to be on the mayor. Borough presidents can introduce legislation in partnership with city council members, but they cannot vote. And then if there are questions about how the law is executed or enacted, then we're going to call Judge Johnson and ask her to interpret the law for us.
There you go.
Yes, absolutely. There are judges who interpret whether something is constitutional or not, whether it is discriminatory, but also on a day-to-day basis in terms of the interpretation. Everything on my desk is asking me what I think about the state of the law. So every decision that I'm making, every ruling, as Sania said, I spent 2 years in criminal court, and that was absolutely in your face of interpreting what the law was as to who was going home that day, who was going to Rikers Island, who was going to have an order of protection issued for him or her, or who was not going to, a stay away order, or just so many decisions made every single day, all the time. Now in the Supreme Court, I'm still making decisions largely in like the mental hygiene part, where I'm deciding who has to stay in a psychiatric hospital longer than they want to, or who can be medicated against their will in a psychiatric hospital, whose house is going to be foreclosed on. who can be adopted, who's going to, in family court, there's a myriad of decisions that they're making. So I just say all of those things to say that I feel like in the judiciary branch, people overlook it as if people are just sitting there on this ivory tower, just, you know, pontificating on high, but they're actually making decisions every day that affect everyday people.
That's right.
And I can't stress enough that in my experience, that is always the area that people have the least amount of information. Every single year, I get phone calls on election day saying, who are these people? Who should I vote for? And, you know, I can't say that I've never answered that question, but I'll say I'm not supposed to answer that question. I can't tell anybody who to vote for. I can tell them whether I know them and my interpretation, but that's not sufficient. All of these people, as was just said by Kimberly, they have extensive candidate websites, including the judges now.
Yes.
Just another aside, the judiciary elections used to be who was nominated is who won. That is not the case now. People are nominated by parties, and for the last, I looked it up, for the last 5 elections, there's every single year been an upset. The person who was nominated by a party is not the person who won at the primary. So your vote absolutely counts, and those are utterly crucial at the primary level. So look into these people. You can't ask them the same questions that you would ask someone running for city council, but from their background, you could really get some sort of opinion about who these people are and whether you believe that they would represent your interests or the interests of your community.
Yeah,
And
I
how
think
long-
a lot of people don't understand how judges are selected when you talk about like the county slate. So like each county, Kings County, Queens County, Manhattan County, New York County, Richmond County has a county committee. And they have an executor over that county committee, or a boss, they call them. And then there are state committee people, and these are elected officials, elected people, state committee people. There's a male and a female. We call them district leaders. And each district leader, they have judiciary committees. And those judiciary committees, along with the district leaders and the county bosses, get together in each county, and they choose a slate of judges that party is going to represent. So like right now in New York City for Supreme Court, there's only Democratic candidates that are running. I think there may be 1 or 2 Republicans that are running. And as Judge Johnson said, it's now more than ever, you're seeing a lot of independent people who are coming up and deciding that they're going to push against what we call machine candidates, and who are actually making wonderful strides. But there's a group of people who you probably have no idea who they are, who are getting together now on a Zoom, having a conversation, and these candidates for judge are coming before them. And then it's based on their recommendation, these people are getting nominated for a slate to run for, particularly for Supreme Court. And Supreme Court judges, I think your terms are like what, 14 years?
14 years.
14 years. See, this is
And
why. Go ahead,
I was going to
Denise.
say that also the Supreme Court civil term where I am is the lowest level of no, actually it's not. It's the lowest level of the state trial courts. The next level up is called the appellate division, where there are 4 divisions. Those judges are appointed by the governor, but they can only come from elected Supreme Court judges. So who you're voting in Supreme is necessarily going to be who funnels up to the appellate division, which is the first appellate court to interpret all of the trial judges.
Wow.
So it's doubly important.
This is important because 14 years, I bet you all haven't been talking about that at the dining room table. You know, this is why when we have candidate nights, we're starting to have candidate nights looking at judges, right? Candidates for judge positions, having those conversations. Next slide, please, Janair, because this is part of how we get to the next thing. So we started talking about voting. Let's just hit some of these. And I really wanted tonight's talk to be a little bit deeper and different than your basic presidential candidate talk. We're going to get there. But let's look at some voter participation trends that after you've heard what Honorable Denise and Deputy have said, you want to start thinking about what role can I play in my building, right? At the laundromat, when I go to the grocery store. When you look at this statistic that the last national election, did I get this right, Kimberly? 55 million eligible voters did not vote. 55 million. So you think you don't need to ask the people in your elevator. You think you can take your vote cap off. I wear my vote cap everywhere. I'm just not wearing an Arthur Ashe sports ball. That's where I am, coming to you live from a sports ball, because this is that important. Talk to us about, we talked about the role of the primary. What are some of the factors influencing our turnout that could actually suppress voting, from both of you all's opinion right now? Some of the things we may not be paying attention to that are playing in the background. And if anybody who's come to this conversation wants to come off mic and say something, join us, because we're an intimate group, but we're mighty. Okay, what have we got on these particular trends?
I know that Kimberly has a lot of information that is amazing. I just want to add my little 2 cents in. One of the things that I have found, I work with several organizations that have really concentrated on voter education and voter registration. And it is not by coincidence that I have never, ever done a voter registration where I did not have some person, and usually a Black man, tell me I cannot register to vote because I have a felony record, because I was previously incarcerated, because I was previously on parole, or whatever. It is absolutely not a coincidence that that is the word that has gotten around the community. And no matter how often community groups try to press it, unless, in my opinion, unless it is coming from some other, in addition to community groups, coming from official capacities, parole, probation, etc., this will be continuing this trend. And I do believe that is a purposeful form of voter suppression, of lack of information.
Thank you for that, because we do have to keep saying it. I was at a table and I was trying to do voter registration in one of our community restaurants, and the brother's waiting for his food. I'm like, "Are you registered?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, come on." He said, "I can't vote." I said, "But you're not in a cell. You're not behind bars. You're currently not behind bars." Now, I didn't know if perhaps he had an issue with his mental health, but he would not come to the table. Eventually, I had to stop because I didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable. So thank you for that, Denise.
I mean, like it's thinking of this from a historical context. When we think about the fact that, and we talked about this earlier this week, you know, that when we say that people died for us to have this right, and I'm talking about people of color, Medgar Evers, who was shot in his driveway while his family was, you know, right inside the house, because he was registering people to vote in Mississippi. And we were talking about who was it, Cheney, Schwerner,
And Goodman.
We have a
Goodman,
slide on that. Next slide, Janera. Yes.
who were down in the South, who were working working to try to register people to vote. And you think about Fannie Lou Hamer, who in 1964 was a delegate from her state. She was a sharecropper who was a delegate, who was elected as a delegate to go to the Democratic National Convention, but they refused to seat her, to allow her to be able to come in and cast her vote in person. Like, there's so many people, states outside of New York. In New York, we really don't have to deal with a whole bunch of voter suppression. We do have the challenges around those who are involved in a carceral state. But, you know, as we know, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, so that people do not know that if they are not in custody, and if they have not been convicted of a felony, and if they are have their mental faculties, that they do have the right to register, to reapply, to register to vote. But outside of the state of New York, there are so many things that are happening. In the state of Georgia, we were talking about this, the voter ID laws that they put in place. And this was done by the current governor when he was trying to make sure that Stacey Abrams did not become the governor of the state of Georgia. And here we are, this country, which was established in 1776, and we have never had a Black woman as a governor of any state in the United States. And so one of the things that Georgia implemented was these voter ID laws, where you have to have identification in order to vote. And one of the things that they implemented was you can use an expired driver's license from the state of Georgia, or you could use your college ID if you went to a public institution. And when we think about that, it's like, oh, okay, I could use my college ID, but the HBCUs in Atlanta Spelman and Clark Atlanta and Morehouse are private institutions. They are not public institutions. And so, you know, they're about 20 years ahead of us in their thinking as they are plotting these things out. So we have to educate our family members that are out of state in North Carolina and in Georgia and in Mississippi, who are down south, and make sure, number one, that they're educated about what is at stake. But that they also understand, you know, how to come together, how to build coalition, and how to dispatch people and organize so that when they go to these polls, that they are not intimidated, that they are not disenfranchised, that they understand that, and I believe that they do, because I think we got a report today that over 300,000 people in Georgia have already voted. So I think that people
Wow.
understand what is
Including Jimmy Carter.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, 100 years old, 100 years old. He cast his
Yes.
absentee ballot. So I think people do understand, but we can't take anything for granted. And so in addition to making sure that we take our souls to the polls, we need to talk to all of our friends and family who are out of state and make sure that they understand the importance of exercising that right to vote.
That's right. And what's involved? Next slide. It's
I
gonna
wanted
be,
to
go
just
ahead,
add
Denise. I'm sorry.
something that I read, and after our conversation the other day, it made me think about it again, that we were discussing the importance of making sure that people's votes are not suppressed. But the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who's the most brilliant, said, "We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote."
Mhm.
So
That's right.
sometimes it is not the physical suppression, it is not just stopping someone physically from getting to the poll, but a lot of the mental tricks that are being played on people to make them believe it doesn't matter anyway.
That's right.
And that is something that, as you said, thank goodness in New York, that is not a huge issue, that we're not stopping people who don't have a hunter's license or anything like that. But we do have a large voter apathy issue in New York City. And maybe we won't see it in the next couple of weeks because people seem to be really jazzed up about this. But when we start to see in the midterm elections, or we start to see when we're voting for the governor, or things that people deem as lesser elections, that apathy sinks in hard. And
Yeah.
all of us of community need to be working on that.
And just kind of like to piggyback off of what Judge Johnson was sharing, you know, when we think about the pockets in our neighborhoods that have the lowest voter turnouts, and I'm talking about in primaries, those are the neighborhoods that need the most resources. So you have a
Yes.
neighborhood like downtown Brooklyn, Park Slope and Brooklyn Heights and Carroll Gardens and Cobble Hill, where you can count on 59,000 people in that district who are registered who will vote, right? They don't have issues with transportation. They don't have issues with their educational systems. They don't have issues with parking, policing, sanitation. But then you go to a neighborhood like Brownsville, Brooklyn,
Mhm.
where we have an incredibly low voter turnout. And in Brownsville, Brooklyn, you will see that the life expectancy is 10 years less. It is always 10
Wow.
degrees hotter in Brownsville than it is any place else. That there
Seriously?
it is 10 degrees hotter than the rest of Brooklyn. That the socioeconomic status, that you're talking about $100,000 difference in salary between somebody that lives in Brownsville and somebody that lives in Park Slope. And so the neighborhoods that get the resources are the neighborhoods that have understood how to exercise their civic rights and how to engage with elected officials. And so the conversations that we need to begin to have with our people that live in these neighborhoods where they have this level of empathy is that your relationship with the elected does not end in the voting booth.
That's
That
right.
your
That's
relationship
right.
begins at the point when they are in elective office. And that I've been having so many conversations with people in our communities. What do you want?
Right.
What
That's
is
right.
your plan? What are some of the things that you would like to see happening within your community? And how are you building coalition? How are you bringing like-minded people together who
That's
want
right.
the same things that you want? And then how are you going onto the website of your city council member, your borough president, your community board member, or your district manager, and then demanding and I mean demanding, that they make time to sit down and have a conversation with you about the things that are your priorities. But first, we've got to develop an agenda. And then we've got to make sure that we get in their face. And if they don't want to take a meeting with you, their schedules are public. You can
That's
go to
right.
City and State, which is a daily publication, and they'll let you know this elected is going to be here, this elected is going to be there. Show up where they are.
That's
Talk
right.
to their
That's right.
residents
Get
and
fired up.
how to get in their face. Other communities have done this well, and
That's
we
right.
are doing the same thing.
And this is why we're doing this in the coalition. We know we've got an election, but to your point, Deputy, we want this to keep going because this isn't time to end. This is just the beginning. No matter how the election turns out, we have to keep going. Menacing has a wonderful tradition in Brooklyn, right? You got people that went to that camp that love to get together, get on buses, go shopping, have a good old time. But that is speaking to the coalition you're talking about, where those people that love that community live other places, but will come back in a minute to support. And so everybody has the ability to whisper in someone's ear and start a pairing to a trio, to a pod, to a coalition. And that's part of why we're doing this. So thank you for that. Next slide. And if you all have questions and comments, this is the time to jump in. I don't know if there's anything in the chat, but part of why we're here is we really want to talk about all the things that we know, but make sure you have a couple of words that you can take to your friends and family, and you're not missing opportunities. I was at a birthday party and they were doing their thing, cracking jokes, don't look up. Everybody seen that movie. And I was like, guys, y'all got big PWI degrees, 6 letters behind your name. Can we spend the hour plotting the revolution? I just don't want to spend time telling jokes about what could happen. I want us to be ready for the day after in my community, right? And some of them thought that was a joke, but most of them know me know I really wasn't joking. I want to know, what are each of us going to do the day after? I'll take this side of the street, you take that side of the street, but people will be in whatever state of elation or depression, and we want to have something ready. Soup's on at my house either way, because we have to keep meeting and keep talking, right, Kim? That's a perfect opportunity to take that energy and turn it around. So that's why we're meeting. Anybody want to go through our 5 reasons? I feel like we got everything, particularly number 3 and 5. Representation.
Oh, one thing that I just wanted to add from a prior conversation is that I do believe that people think, well, this person is elected to represent me, so they're going to listen to what I have to say, just because I am their constituent. And that would be lovely. That would be wonderful, but it's not real. We saw, looking at one of the earliest examples that I saw when I just moved to New York City, as Giuliani was in office, and you looked at the HOV lanes in Staten Island, and you looked at the roads even in Staten Island versus, say, the Bronx. And I was like, this is the same city. How is this possible? Oh, because Staten Island voted for Giuliani and the Bronx did not. So where you cast your vote is very important, obviously, as to who gets into office. But even if your person doesn't win, there is a follow through with that. You leave their office and they go look up, well, when was the last time that Kimberly Council actually cast a vote? Oh, when Obama was in office, we don't really care that much what she has to say, because she's not cashing in her own political leverage. So the process is important. Obviously, the result is important. I'm sorry?
Yes. No, I said I see Felicia's head going up and down because people don't know your voting history is public.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like as someone who has run for office, we look at what are called double and triple prime voters. So, who has voted in the last 2 or 3 primaries? And because you don't have the funding or the resources to be able to target an entire, particularly when you look at Brooklyn, which is 2.75 million people, or if I'm running for city council, where you're looking at about 160,000 people who are registered, but you're going to look at those 8,000 people And that's going to become your universe. And those are the people who you're going to target your policies, who you're going to have conversations with. Those are the people who you're going to engage with, because those are the people who are going to be deciding whether or not you're in office. So if I'm in the district where only 8,000 people vote in a primary election, those are the people who are going to get my
That's
attention.
right.
Those are the people who I'm going to send my marketing materials to. Those are the people whose doors I'm going to be knocking on. Those are the people who I'm going to be calling, because when you're running for office, you don't have the resources to hit 162,000 people. So we really have to pay attention to how engaged we are, because if we're not voting in primaries, the people who are running for office are not even thinking about what it is that we have to say or do.
Yeah, this is important. These reasons around representation, accountability, legitimacy, and what you're talking about is change and progress. The example that you just gave, Denise talked about someone paying attention to what I did can actually push the policy or reform. So that's important. Next slide, and we're almost towards our
There's a hand.
meeting.
We have a
Yeah,
question.
We have a
Oh,
hand.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Good question. Hand up. Who's got a hand up?
Yeah, Felicia.
Hi, Felicia.
I'm listening to you ladies speak, and I'm thinking I grew up in Staten Island, and I grew up, and Staten Island is very segregated politically, where individuals live on one side of the island or the other. I was a bus student who did go to public school. And I can say when I moved to Queens, my education from public school in Staten Island being bus was equivalent to some of the college level students. That
Wow.
was surprising to me, because when you live in an area and you're not exposed to other people, you think that education is equal, and education is not equal.
No,
And
it
it
is
has to
not.
do with the money that's put into the community. And although that, I was fortunate enough to be put in a lottery and bused to public school, many of our people here don't have that opportunity. So I just think that when I'm out talking to people, I purposely say, I am the product of public school, the product of undergraduate public school. Yes, I went to private graduate school, but I am the product of public school, but not of public school within the actual city.
That's right. That's important. Because that whole thing needs, more we talk about and open these conversations, the better. Next slide, Janera. Thank you for that. And thanks for bringing that piece in. So we're kind of going through, there should be one or two
Oh,
more
yeah,
slides.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to, so I think, did we cover, does everyone understand the New York State and city local elections? We kind of went through that. If we want to do it quickly, but I think Kim and Denise did a good job of looking at the layers of our system that we really need to be educated about around the infrastructure. I was at a community board meeting for Community Board 12 last night. Blew me away. The decision was made by the community board that a particular access to build a building was denied. Now, what comes after that process, we're going to talk about, but the people had the power, and that's part of what we're trying to do, and make sure this power goes all the way up for your governor and your state senator. Anything you all want to weigh in on this slide?
I just wanted to add something that we've all been paying attention to what's going on in the executive branch of our city. And one thing that has been interesting is how many more people are now paying attention to the role of the public advocate. I believe
Yes.
that it was a job that people, okay, it's a citywide position, but a lot of people had no idea what that job actually entails. And
Yes.
I saw so many, I was watching New York One, and they were asking people on the street, if the mayor steps down or the mayor hits the lottery and decides to retire, who becomes the next mayor? Most people thought that it would be that the person right under that would be the speaker of the city council. First of all, most people on the street couldn't tell you who the speaker of the city council was, but the vast majority thought that that was the next position under that becomes the next.
Wow.
So it's not even
Wow.
a deputy. The other thing too, like when
Or
Dr.
deputy mayor, yeah, that was
Deputy
another
mayor.
one.
Dr. Banks was talking about your community boards, and understanding how do you get on your community board? Community boards are appointed by your city council members and by your borough president. So your
That's
borough
right.
president is the one who makes the decision as to who sits on this community board. And then there are a whole bunch of other neighborhood advisory boards. Almost every city agency has a neighborhood advisory board. And then for the education part, there used to be school boards that were elected, but now school board is no longer a school board. There's a community education council, and then there are PEPs, and this community education councils, those members are appointed.
Yeah.
The mayor has so many appointees, the borough presidents have so many appointees. The BP, if he has good relationships with the local electeds, will allow them to weigh in. But understanding that there are a whole bunch of other positions that people are appointed to, and the people who are in elective office are the ones who make those decisions about who sits on those boards, as well as there are a whole bunch of civic organizations, like
Yes.
civic institutions like the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the public libraries, museums. Those people, the borough presidents have ex officio appointees that sit on those boards, as well as local development corporations and
Wow.
business improvement districts. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to be engaged in what's happening in our communities.
I
And just
think
one
this
other
is
position that's
essential.
not on here, and we did discuss very briefly, was the role of the district leader.
Hmm.
Yes, the
That's a
district leader.
that's a very small election, few thousand
But it's
people in a district
powerful.
leader's position, but the power that comes, and it is also an unpaid position. But those
Yeah.
are the people that are bringing the attorneys who want to become judges. Those are the people that are bringing the people who want to be on the these community boards and other appointed positions, bringing them from their own community to the people who make the appointments.
Yes,
And
that's right.
in some instances, they also can determine who works at the polls.
Yes,
That's
yes.
Voting
right.
rights
That's
within their
right.
district.
Wow, wow. See, this is important because when we talk about voting, this conversation is open to where each of us in all of our organizations needs to be sitting on something because there's so many things to sit on, right? If I want to be appointed to the community board, I'm on a committee with my borough president right now on African American culture. I sit on that committee. That committee then gets me put in other positions and places so that I can hear and know what's going on. So I know it feels like a lot of work, but then it's going to help me make my voting decisions better because I'm walking through the halls and I'm showing up at meetings and places. Next slide,
Can we
because we
just
are
also
at,
add that we, of
yes.
course, need more women, more Black women of a like mind to run for these positions? To
100%.
just jump in and just do it, because we have a lot of positions that the people have been sitting there doing the same amount of nothing for the last 47 years. And
That's right.
Yeah, and I want to add to that there are some nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to helping to educate, to provide
Yes.
support, and to help you to understand the financial how to raise money, how to set your campaigns in place. There's Higher Heights for Women, there's Win with Black Women, there's Emily's List, there's Women Who Run. There are all of these nonprofit organizations, Amplify Her, 21 and 21. There are a whole bunch of organizations around elevating women's voices in local, national, state electoral spaces.
This is great. They didn't have this back in the day. And you can learn and it's worth it, particularly for us and our daughters. Take us through in the last few minutes, if you would, Kim or Denise, where are we? Because we're coming up to our presidential election. What is it that we need to understand and know about this as we get ready to go into this federal extensive battle?
I think one thing to understand is, number one, the importance of filling out the census every 10 years. You fill out
Yes.
the census determines representation in the House of Representatives. So we have this bicameral system, where we have the United States Congress and we have the United States Senate. And the Senate was set up because of an argument with states in the South who did not want the North and the South was arguing about population, And because slaves were counted towards population, but were not allowed to vote, people wanted to make sure that there was some equity around states' rights. And so we have the United States Senate, which each state has 2 senators, regardless of your size. But population then determines how many members we have in the House of Representatives. And how they determine the number of people who are in a state is based on who fills out the census and where. So when we fill out that census, then we're also thinking about the when we vote in a federal election, which is different from when we vote in a local election, your vote is important because your vote, depending on which state you live on, will determine how the delegates will vote in the Electoral College. So each state has so many electors who will then go in and ratify that this state is going to cast its 350 electoral votes for this particular candidate. So this is why you've seen over the years where Al Gore and Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College. And so again, this all pushes back to slavery and people not wanting states that had slaves who had a larger population than states that didn't have slaves to have more power over who was going to be representing us. And so you have this Electoral College that makes the determination, which is why we have all these conversations about swing states like Pennsylvania and Texas and Nevada and Alabama and Ohio and all of these different types of things, because for the most part, we know that up and down the East and the West Coast, those states are gonna be blue. But it's the middle of the country where you have multiple states that are red. And then when you start doing the math, you might look at a Michigan, and you might look at a Georgia, which is now kind of purple, or North Carolina, which may be purple. And so it's like the way that number 45 was able to get into office was because he figured out how to work the Electoral College. So we have to make sure that we are paying attention to filling out that census every 10 years, because that determines how many representatives we'll have in the House of Representatives, but it also determines how many delegates that we'll have for the state, and it also determines how many electors we will have to vote in the Electoral College, which ultimately is how the President of the United States will be selected.
That is brilliant. We need a whole segment on that, don't you think, Janera? Next slide, we are winding down. We've been talking for an hour. It feels like 35 minutes. There's so much to pack in here. But basically, what you all have been telling us is about the challenges of voting, how we can lower the barriers to participation, what the ID laws impact in terms of public college and private college and accessibility, and the fact that we have to keep ourselves inspired and educated so we can get to the polls, whether you're military, whatever your piece is, from the Constitution and civil rights. This is the most important part of our story. Next slide. And I'm going to help wind us up. So I want to we're going to have some closing comments. And for those of you that hung in here, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Any questions? This is the time for a few questions. Janera's trying to get in here, and then we want Kim to have a closing comment and Denise to have a closing comment about saving our democracy.
There's a question from, I see Miss Owens has a question.
Michelle, yeah.
Okay,
Hi.
Ms. Owens, thank
Hi,
you.
everybody. Two questions. One is a very particular question, and one is more a comment. You mentioned about absentee ballots, and I'm wondering if someone is in a long-term care facility, rehab, nursing home, or whatever, would they get an absentee ballot sent at the last place that they voted, or do they need to change their address, particularly if the stay in this place is going to be, lengthy? Do they need to change their address and then ask for an absentee ballot? Like, how would
That's
that?
a great question.
I believe the application asks you where you want the ballot sent.
Right.
Okay.
And they can also appoint a proxy to pick up their ballot for them from the Board of Elections.
Okay. Okay.
How do they go about appointing a proxy?
As part of the request for the absentee ballot, it'll ask you
Okay.
who is authorized to pick up your ballot for you.
Okay, got it. Good.
That's helpful. And the other thing, I just want to make a comment. First of all, thanks for this. It's very informative and very wide ranging. I speak to a lot of young people, and what I hear from some of them, certainly some of them are very, very much aware, and they're knowledgeable, and they plan to vote. But then there are others who seem to be a combination of not fully aware of history and not necessarily connected to the history of struggle that was involved in getting us to vote. And so they don't have that kind of emotional need to vote based upon history, but also have a sense of disenchantment with what elected officials have done so far and the conditions that, you know, the world is now in that they have to face and deal with. And I think one of the things that's really been helpful, I believe, in some of these conversations I've had, is to do what you've done here, which is to link not only the need to vote, but to link it with the need for engagement. Because I think one of the things that really is helpful to young people is for them to not just hear, oh, you just want me to vote to somebody who's gonna like keep me in the same bad condition I think I'm in, but that we want you to vote and then advocate and engage and follow up and also maybe seek to have some of these positions yourself. So I think that that linkage when we're talking to young people gives them both an action to take in terms of voting, but also something to be optimistic about in terms of how they can personally connect to, you know, who they voted for and what they want at the end of the day. And so I just wanted to add that. And just another tip, or, you know, just a suggestion. A friend of mine did this with all the young people in her family. She spoke with some of the older people in her family. They gathered together all the younger people in a Zoom call, and they had an extended conversation about, are you voting? If you're not voting or you're not interested in voting, what's going on? And they just really fleshed out that conversation, because the other thing that was helpful was for these younger people to be heard and to not be dismissed as, you know, just kind of soft and uneducated and those kinds of things. And so she found it really helpful. I haven't done it with my own family yet, but it's just something that, you know, is a suggestion for anyone who's grappling with a young person who says there's no need to vote. So those
I was just talking today to members of my staff about the fact that the presidential candidates are now going on these podcasts, and they're going on, you know, morning talk shows and Howard Stern, for goodness sake, which would never have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So my undergraduate degree is in journalism, and we had a really in-depth conversation about that. How, now that we no longer have Black media in the way that we had, we don't have Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine, we don't have Black newspapers, even on Black station, or even on stations, we have the shifting from Black news anchors, that it is, again, not a coincidence that Melissa Harris Perry and Don Lemon are not on national TV every night in the way that they were. We have to find a way as a community to find our young people where they are and where they're getting their information from, sometimes to challenge some of the misinformation, but also to really understand how they're thinking and how their thought processes are, because my thought process at 51 is very different than it was at 21. And I can't expect from my nephews a 51-year-old mind. So I love that, Ms. Michelle, that everybody can, even starting with your circle of young people, to just have a conversation.
But and I think to your point, Judge Johnson, you know, young people get their information on social media and on the internet. And so like you had so you have all of these podcasts and everybody's on YouTube. And I mean, like, as an information professional, it drives me a little crazy that they take this stuff as law. But I mean, like, one of the candidates did an interview with Charlemagne on iHeartRadio, which was broadcast on CNN and MSNBC, but it was also on YouTube, and that video has been viewed over 1 billion times. So our kids are very savvy about how they get their information, and they are definitely not looking at any of the traditional media outlets. But I'm also grateful that we have podcasts like Native Land, which is Angela Rye and Tiffany Cross and Gillum. And then we have you know, we have what's that guy's name? The Black guy from the, oh God, he's an alpha. He's at all Roland Martin.
Roland Martin.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And so we have all of these, you know, not and you got the Breakfast Club, and you've got like all of these different ways that our kids are engaging, and that the people who are now in elective office are now like, you know what, I'm gonna go to where the people are listening. And they're using social media, they're using their Instagram and TikTok and Facebook
Right.
and all these types of different venues to get their message across. So our
Right.
young people are very, very, very savvy. And thankfully, the people who are running, at least at the national level, have tapped into that talent and engaged in a way, like you said, like never before.
This is tremendous. Listen, we could keep going. I'm glad I see Effie's joined us. She's amazing and I've been out doing a lot of work. I think we are really having the conversation that needs to replicate itself. I think what Michelle brought, make sure that you are talking to your young people, have a Zoom. We're all on these family chats and just bring it up, put the link in. This will be a YouTube Sunday brunch. Meet us up. We're going to find out what's up with you. Do your own TikTok video, whatever it takes, but we've got to keep them engaged. This is not a one and done. This is clearly we're learning that we've got to evolve. So on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Manhattan Chapter, Public Policy Committee, those of us that had a little more energy to come on and listen, we thank you so much. And we definitely thank our Deputy Borough President. She always says yes when I text Rev Kim. She's like, yes, and when. And yeah, we're going to take our scarves off and do a run through because it's that important. And I also want to thank my honorable Denise Johnson, who consistently applies her deep thought around this. When you hear what she is trying to determine every day, it is going to impact us and our neighbors. Someone's going to come to you about what's happening with the mental health of my child, what's going on. And now you know these decisions are being made well. So I'd like to turn it back to Janera, our Vice President of Programs for Manhattan Chapter, who's produced us today. We will keep this, we'll take it into our YouTube so people can listen to us and make sure it's okay. And thank you so much. Keep up the work because it's
Yes,
only
yes,
just
yes.
begun, right? No matter
Absolutely.
what happens on election day, we have just started. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything. Felicia, Effie, 718-712. If you want to say anything, Jazinia, thank you for your comment in the chat. Thank you all for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you all and have a great evening. Thanks, you ladies.
Take good
Thank
care.
you.
I'm going
Good
back to
night.
Okay.
sports ball.
Get something to eat, Sonia. Sonia.
I am. I'm going to put
Sonia,
my
get something to
sneakers
eat.
on. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.